So yeah, today we'll talk about the history and future of revenue management, where it comes from, what kind of precursors there are to the concept that we have today, and where it will go in the future according to our expert Ingo here. Ingo is the co-founder and managing director at Buynomics. He has more than 14 years of experience in pricing, revenue growth management, and is working with global companies around exactly the challenges that we're facing today in RGM. And I'm Paul. I'm leading sales at Buynomics. So if you want to learn more about us, please do reach out to me. I will leave my LinkedIn and my email here for you today as well. And happy to kind of moderate also the Q&A. So if you have questions, I already see the first question in the chat, and that's great. Please do ask them in the chat, so we can share that with Ingo live or in the Q&A at the end. Or if you want to just have a personal question, then you can also use the Q&A button below. So that's you'll see that down here in the taskbar. Then maybe just going to the next slide on Buynomics. So we are a software provider for revenue growth management teams. Our goal is to make you more holistic, having more than just one lever in a tool, and really creating that single source of truth. Be accurate, having a source of truth you can trust. Be fast, having the advantage of software and cloud, leverage to its full potential, and in the end, being more profitable and having better business outcomes. But I'll hand over to you, Ingo. I think most of our attendees are here, and we'll start with the content, and I will be ready for any questions in the chat.
Well, thank you, Paul, for the introduction, and everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I think we have another interesting topic. I think we had something, it builds on something we did last month, where we talked about the revenue manager, or revenue growth manager of the future. Today we'll be talking a bit about the history and future of revenue management, talk a bit about where the field came from, what at least in our point of view, what the main challenges and the reason why the field exists, and what we think some of the future trends will be, or what the direction will be that the field moves or should move. And as always, as Paul mentioned, if you have any questions, if you disagree with anything we say, then please write it in the comment. We really like to discuss these topics at the end. And yeah, I really want to have a lively discussion towards the end. Ideally, we'll put something on the table to discuss, something maybe thought-provoking, something interesting. So we'll try to have a good half hour together here from now. So without further ado, let's jump right in. And when we talk about history and future of anything, or particular future of anything at the moment, I think it's really difficult to do that without referring to and particularly in the context of machine learning, where we also are as a company to get around ChatGPT and related technologies. And I think what we want to do is, just to kick this off, is really to look at the good, the bad, maybe also a little bit at the ugly of this technology. And we'll start with the good. So I think if we want to have an understanding of, and it makes sense when we start with the topic, to have a definition of what we mean by revenue growth management, is to start with a proper definition. And when you ask ChatGPT about the definition of what is revenue growth management, you get a very good definition, and I'll just briefly read it to you. Revenue growth management is the process of identifying and implementing strategy to increase a company's revenue. This can include tactics such as expanding into new markets, increasing pricing, improving sales and marketing efforts, and launching new products or services. It involves analyzing data, identifying trends and opportunities, and marketing decisions that will drive revenue growth. The goal of revenue growth management is to maximize the company's financial performance and increase its overall value. So it's difficult to disagree with this. I think here and there, it can be a bit more specific, particularly towards the end. What we mean by financial performance in the context of pricing, revenue management, we typically means something like profit or revenue optimization. But the rest is I think, really very much to the point. And just to add on the right side here, when we talk about revenue management, we mean at its core profit and revenue optimization, really depending a bit on the strategy of the company. And we do this by pricing, portfolio, promotion, and product decisions typically, and within the context of related areas like marketing, sales, M&A, market expansion, and so on. So this is really what we understand as revenue management. And I would say just here at this point with ChatGPT, we have a really good guide in what the proper definition of the term is. Can we use it for actual price or revenue growth management decision? Here it's a bit more tricky. We asked it the following question, which shouldn't be hard for a revenue manager. So I hope you can see it. Otherwise, I'll just read the core idea of it. So I sell my product at 100 euros. My margin is 50%, and the price elasticity of my product is -3. So it's rather elastic. I want to maximize my profit. Should I increase the price of my profit? So that's the question. Should I increase the price, or should I maybe decrease the price? And the answer we get from ChatGPT is, and I'll just read the beginning of it, given the price elasticity of -3, an increase in the price of your product would likely result in a decrease in the quantity demanded, which would have an impact on your profit. To maximize your profit, you would need to consider the trade-off between increasing the price and the potential decrease in demand. If you increase the price, each unit sold will generate more revenue, but you may sell fewer units, and so on and so on. So it's not wrong. Everything it says is correct, but it's a bit like a student who has prepared for the wrong exam. It's what it says is correct, but it's not really answering the question. To answer the question, we need to know things that are really specific to RGM or pricing. That is, for example, in the profit optimum, margin times price elasticity is -1. So in this case, 50% margin -3. If you multiply these two, it's -1.5. So that means you're not in the profit optimum, but to get closer to 1, your margin in this case is too high. So to increase your profit, you would need to reduce the price. And you can, so this would be the core insight. And of course, there are things like competition that might have an effect on elasticity that are also to be considered. But the core answer would be based on this relationship between margin and elasticity. And that's something that ChatGPT here didn't consider. So I think just to kick this session off, so we have this technology, but it's not yet right for what we want to do in RGM and pricing. So it's not there yet. And what we want to argue is that essentially for the RGM decisions, a different type of model different type of modeling is required, and not the large language models that underlie the technology like ChatGPT in this case. All right, so this is just to kick things off. The topic of today is, of course, history and future of RGM. So makes sense to start a bit with the history. Won't bore you too much with that, but I think it makes sense to just take a step back and look at the past roughly 100 years to get an understanding of what's already happened, where the field comes from, and where it makes sense that it's going. So I would say the first cases that are really moving towards a professionalization of the field is when companies started to put more effort on marketing the products, and also starting with sales promotions, which happened roughly 100 years ago, somewhere in the 20s, 30s. And I think I would say the next key step in the field, somewhere around the 50s, 60s, companies started doing or professionalizing their market research, really gaining an understanding of what competitor products cost, what sales or market shares they have, what really understanding the consumer needs. All of these techniques Conjoint, Van Westendorp, Garber Granger really come from this era around the 60s, 70s. If you look at where these methods originated, it's typically in this area. So first in the 20s, around companies starting doing certain measures, marketing and promotions, and 50s, 60s, 70s, looking more towards really understanding the consumer, understanding the market, and then taking ideally better actions based on that knowledge. The next major step, somewhere around the 80s, 90s, was then an increase in technology at its simplest form, of course, things like Excel and other office software, but also more database and broader technologies that help RGM teams to better understand and really manage their markets, also having the technology to really steer promotions at a store level or at a retailer level to be able to do that. And what we think, and I think there's probably not too much disagreement, is that the next step where we're now really moving towards is that we are based on that technology, based on the market insights that we have and the ability to really then also implement marketing and promotion strategies, is to really optimize all of this together using ideally advanced technologies ranging from really advanced statistics, but also including machine learning, AI-based, like really holistic solutions that are able to combine promotions, combine pricing, pack price architecture, everything that we have at our disposal, and use all of this together. And this is really the point where we are at the moment. So what are we actually doing in revenue management? Let's say we live in a very simple world, right? So the world we know only, or the world that only exists in textbooks, in microeconomics, in high school or university, that always look kind of like this, right? So we have a demand function, we have a price that we set as a supplier, and then depending on the price that we set, we have a certain volume, and with a certain volume and price, we can compute our revenue, or we can compute our profit. And we know what I already said before is that in the optimum, if there's only one product, margin times price elasticity is -1. So if we compare to the previous example that ChatGPT couldn't answer, if we have costs of 100, price elasticity of -2, then the optimal profit, optimal margin should be 50%, and our sales price should be 200. So this is the situation we're in. And if that's all there is, then we're living really in a very simple world, and there's really not much to do other than set the price to 200, and there's really no need for revenue management. Revenue management only becomes relevant if we are living in a much more complex world than the really simplistic world of microeconomics textbooks. And this, thankfully, the world in which we're really living. So, and that gives us the option to be much more nuanced and better. So we go from this picture here on the right side, where we're essentially just one optimal price for the whole market, to a world where we have the complexity that allows us to become better, and ideally, if everything goes well, achieve much higher revenue, or if profit is what we're looking for, achieve a much higher profitability. For example, by being able to differentiate our offer, maybe with different products, maybe with price differentiation over time. All of these things are possible. So, but it's always important to remember that all of this is only possible in a world that allows for complexity. If we're living in the simple world of the textbook, then there's really not much to do. There's one optimal price, and that's all there is to it. All right. So what type of complexities are there? And I'll just go through some of the typical cases that there are. And I'll start with the one that's probably historically one of the older ones, where the field of revenue management really, or the professionalization of revenue management really comes from. And this is airline travel. And here we are in the situation. And again, we have our graph as before, with a little bit different axes as before. So we have on the x-axis time from someplace in the past up to the day, or the time when the flight starts, and after that date, of course, the product, the seats on the plane, lose their value because the flight has already happened. And then over time, we typically have changing willingness to pay of customers. And just to oversimplify here a bit, typically there are two different types of travelers. There are leisure travelers with a lower price willingness to pay, and business travelers with a higher willingness to pay. And a good thing here is that typically business travelers book later than leisure travelers. So in general, to optimize, you have something like this curve here in customers' willingness to pay that starts low, might go up or go down again. Maybe if the flight is to bring fans of a soccer team from their home city to the stadium where the finals are, and then the team loses, drops out, then willingness to pay of these leisure or soccer fans decreases. So these are things that might happen along the way. But in general, the average willingness to pay of the customers as the share of business travelers increases. So the way to deal with that is really to start with a low price, and then steer the price up and down by comparing how much you expect to sell over time versus what you actually sold. So if you expected to have maybe a month before the flight, you expect to have sold half of the tickets and you have sold more, then you need to increase your price more than you expected. If you sell fewer, then you need to decrease. And by this way, you can use the differences in the willingness to pay between different customers to optimize your revenue in this case. So this is in a case of a product where you have typically increasing willingness to pay as the day of the flight approaches, and you have fixed capacity, let's say 100 seats on the plane that need to be sold. Another example is, for example, fashion. You have a fashion product at the beginning of the season, typically at the highest willingness to pay in the market, and then from the beginning of the seasons towards the end, the willingness to pay decreases. And what's typically done in the industry, we're all aware of that, is that you start with a very high price to capture the high willingness to pay in the beginning, and then start with discounts at different points, and then go very low towards the end as the willingness to pay really drops below a certain level. So the difficulty here is in steering revenue management here is really two things: understand when to start discounting, and then by how much. So, and this is really the math that's underneath it, and optimizing this is what's relevant in this case of revenue management. Here again, we have changing willingness to pay over time, so it's decreasing, and we have typically a fixed capacity. In the beginning of the season, you produce a certain number of products, and then you sell them until they're gone. And part of the equation is to understand how much are left over in the end of the season. But you can also do the same differentiation in cases where there are really no capacity constraints and not even much of a change in willingness to pay. I think one interesting example is, at least it doesn't exist in every country, but for example, in Germany, what happens at the gas station is that you have pretty much every day a strong price change throughout the day, in the sense that a gas station start with a very high price at the beginning of the beginning of the day, and then decrease prices throughout the day until the evening, and then have a strong price increase later in the evening when the cheaper gas stations already close and the branded ones are still there. They increase typically 10-15 cents, and then the same game starts the next day. And why do they do that? Essentially, if we again oversimplify, we have price sensitive customers and unsensitive customers. Unsensitive customers come to the gas station whenever their car is empty, and price sensitive customers know about this up and down, so they tend to get gas in the evening. So, and this allows you to differentiate a little bit between these two customer segments. It's not perfect. You always have a certain amount of customers who are not price sensitive, who get the cheap price, but this can be optimized, and companies do that you optimize your overall revenue or your overall profit in this case. And here, because you don't have a fixed capacity, it's really important that you not only look at revenue optimization, as was the case with the airline example, for example, where because you have a fixed capacity, it pretty much costs the same to fly the plane, regardless of the number of seats that you've sold. That in this case, where you sell petrol, you the plane example, revenue optimization and profit optimization is essentially the same. Not the case here in petrol price optimization, where you have unit costs and really shouldn't just aim for revenue optimization, but specifically profit optimization. And the same you also have in consumer goods, where you have also from day to day, in many cases, very similar willingness to pay, and you run promotions. And the idea here again is that with the promotion prices and highlighting the promotions, you also at certain weeks or certain days, you attract the very, very price sensitive customers to your store, and then also achieve selling products to them, and having the less price sensitive customers in the rest of the week or the other weeks, the unpromoted weeks. And this is really the idea. And if it's performed well, you can achieve a higher profit by combining promotions with a certain basic list price. But again, here you have the case that when promotions are ongoing, you always sell to customers with a high willingness to pay, who would also have paid the regular price. If we then compare to our initial graph here, so if the idea is to really sell to every customer to his or her maximum willingness to pay, this is really very, very difficult to achieve in reality, as we saw in the petrol case or in the promotion case, that we always have customers with a very high willingness to pay, who just happen to get the promotion price and pay much less. So in reality, it's really, really difficult to fill this full triangle. But what we're trying to do is use different techniques to get as close as possible to it. We just looked basically at pricing, but of course, in reality, there are many, many more levers at our disposal. For example, if you look at a typical CPG company, we have the prices, we have the pack architecture, so we have different product sizes that we can use. We work with promotions, mixed management, so we have different products, different offers, different prices, maybe different promotions at different channels. So there's much, much more complexity that we can actually work with and should work with. But, and this is, I think, the point that we are making moving towards the future of the field, is that many of the techniques, and here's just a selection of the pricing tools that are typically available, ranging from cost plus pricing. Of course, you all know them to some extent. Competitive pricing, just looking at what competitors do and then having a markup or markdown based on that. Price elasticity pricing, understand based on historical data what the price elasticity is of a product, and understanding if it makes sense, as we showed in the beginning, to increase or decrease the price. Also, we have the tool of value pricing, where we try to understand what are customers willing to pay for different variations of products, here with the ski jacket. But of course, we have it always when we have a portfolio, there are different variations of a product. We have larger packs, smaller packs. Maybe we are using different brands to sell our products. So there's always variation within our portfolio, and that we need to price. And of course, ideally, we also want to consider behavioral aspects such as pricing, price thresholds, or the way people choose from a portfolio, like typical better best portfolio, where one theory is that we try to steer customers to the better products, for example, with a very high best price. So what we're saying is we live thankfully in a very complex world that allows us to actually work with revenue management, use these different levers, ideally to our advantage. But the tools at our disposal are still, and I'm happy to, if you disagree with that, and we can discuss in a few minutes, the tools at our disposal are still very basic and are not really integrated to consider, for example, margin, competition, price elasticity, value pricing, and behavioral pricing at the same time. And what we suggest, and I'll just show you a very simple example of that, is just let me switch my screen. Oh, can you see the browser?
Yes.
And here's just a very simple example. And I would say this is really the equivalent for revenue management of the ChatGPT example that we showed in the beginning, because really when we talk about the challenges we have in RGM, we're not really interested in understanding what the best answer or the best next sentence to our question is, but we're interested in understanding customer preferences and how customers or shoppers decide between different products. And without going too much into the detail, this is really the equivalent of the ChatGPT for RGM. And it allows you, here's a technology where we have two simple products. We are selling apples, and the red one's our competitor. It sells pears, selling these at the same price, 130, both selling the same amount of units. Our shoppers are somewhat indifferent between the two products. Some prefer apples, some prefer pears to some extent. And when we see, for example, if we increase the price of the apples, we here by 8%, we lose units, have a high price elasticity here, -3. But if the competitor also increases price, the alternative is a bit less attractive. Elasticity goes down, so roughly 1.5 for both of them. With this type of technology, in this simple example, we can, for example, look at what happens if we change prices, but we can also, for example, immediately see what happens, what effects it has on units, on revenue, profit. And we see here in this case, and the context of this example is really that we had inflation, cost increase. We were probably a bit too aggressive with our price increase, and we're now a bit above the profit optimum here, which is, we're here at 130. Profit optimum is probably more at like 110. And we see that if we go there, competitor moves farther away from the optimum. And you see this is really the mesh game, where if we decrease price, competitor also decreases price. And at some point, we both are at an equilibrium, which typically is a bit worse for both parties. So what we're saying here is that this type of technology is really the equivalent of the ChatGPT example from the beginning. And what it allows us, and this is really the point I'm trying to make here, is that we can use it to look to really understand what happens if we really use these different levers together. So the base case that we just looked at, we're selling apples, our competitors selling pears here at the certain amounts. And I've already prepared these examples. The question is, what can we do to improve our profitability or improve our revenue? The options are, we do a price reduction. So we reduce our price by 10 cents. We see that we sell more units. We see that we have more revenue, and we also have, in this case, a little bit more profit. What are the other options that we have? Because we don't only have pricing at our disposal. We could say, let's not just decrease the price for all products, but keep the price where it was and only run promotions in, let's say, a third of the weeks. This is what this year produces. Another option would be to increase the price. So we sell a larger apple for a slightly higher price. So we already see that if you compare these options, this is a bit more profitable. Another option would be to move from a single product really to a portfolio of 2 apples, small apple and a large apple. And ideally, what we can also do is combine different measures here. So we have a large apple, a small apple, and in some weeks we promote the large apple. And this, in this case, is really the most profitable option. What I'm trying just to outline here is what from our point of view, the future of revenue management really holds is the option or the technology. And it's really what the ChatGPT technology is for large language models is this type of technology, and we're happy to go into more details if you're interested after the webinar. What we call the virtual shopper technology, and what it really does is it uses data from the specific context, the retailer, a product category, sales data, for example, or survey data, everything that's available, evaluates these and creates these virtual shoppers. And virtual shoppers, what they do is they make buying decisions just like real people, and you can really ask them, once it's parameterized, any type of RGM question. For example, what happens if I increase my price 10%? What happens if I decrease my price? What happens if my competitors follow? What if they don't follow? What if I introduce a new product or change a product? And they really give you the answer in terms of revenue and profit implications that's then really close to what would happen in reality. And this is, just to summarize here, what we think the future of RGM really will be. And this is really what we think where the field is going. And with that, I'll go back to the presentation if it works.
Great.
And I'll go to the Q&A.
Very good. I think we had just a couple of logistical questions about the slides being shared. So do check your inbox with whatever email you registered, and you'll receive both the recording and the slides. And also, if you're interested in our content, follow us on LinkedIn. And Jonathan already posted our registration link for the next webinar, which is the truth behind price elasticities. So why one of the most commonly used pricing methods is not really fit for purpose in this day and age. So if you want to learn more about this to some degree controversial topic, I'm happy to have you there. And we'll also send out invites on LinkedIn if you're connected with us. Maybe just taking a look at the broader calendar, Ingo, we have our webinar with price elasticities, but after that we also have AI and machine learning in pricing, and we have our ongoing series of Buynomics talks where we have pricing and revenue management experts talking about diverse topics together with Ingo. This is more long form format, so happy to have you there as well, and keep out an eye in your inbox for those invites. I think we have a pretty solid expert lineup, Ingo. Do we know, have we confirmed any of the experts yet?
Yeah, well, we confirmed many of them. So we have really some lots of really interesting people from really different fields, ranging from behavioral pricing to understanding what the data challenges are, value pricing, pricing models. So we really have a broad range with experts from the field. We'll announce them in one of the next webinars.
Great stuff. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ingo, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, also thanks. Happy weekend, and sorry for, I think it was a minute or two too long. It's a bit taken away by the topic, but I hope it was interesting, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.